You think you know fear? I thought I did. Stress, deadlines, the constant hum of city anxiety. That was my baseline. But that summer seeking refuge from it all, in a ridiculously cheap cabin in the West Virginia woods, I learned what real fear felt like. Okay, so to start out, I was totally burnt out. Just completely fried from work and city life and everything. I desperately needed to get away, like really get away. Not just a weekend trip to another city, but somewhere completely different, somewhere quiet. I've always been the type to crave peace and solitude when things get too hectic. Cities are cool and all, but sometimes you just need to hear crickets and wind, not sirens and car horns, right? Anyway, I started looking online for rentals. Airbnb, VRBO, all those sites. I was searching for something remote, preferably in the mountains or by the coast, somewhere with nature. You get the picture. My budget was, let's just say, tight. Freelancing isn't always the most stable gig, and I hadn't exactly been rolling in dough lately. So I was scrolling through pages and pages of places, most of them way too expensive or not quite what I was looking for. Then I stumbled upon this listing. It was a cabin. A really, really cheap cabin, like suspiciously cheap. The photos were kind of grainy and taken at weird angles, but from what I could see it was nestled in the woods, looked rustic and cozy, had a fireplace, and, well, that was pretty much all I needed to see. The description was short and sweet, something like, secluded cabin in the woods. Perfect for nature lovers, basic amenities provided. The location was listed as somewhere in rural West Virginia. I'd never been to West Virginia, but I'd heard it was beautiful, all mountains and forests and stuff. It sounded perfect. I clicked on the host profile. Just a name, Elias. No photo, no reviews. Red flag number 1, maybe. But honestly, at that price, and with my desperation levels maxed out, I was willing to overlook a few red flags. I messaged Elias, just a simple inquiry about availability and confirming the listed price was correct. He replied within an hour, super brief. Just available, price correct. Okay, not exactly chatty, but efficient, I guess. I booked it for a week. Figured a week of solitude in the woods was exactly what the doctor ordered. Leading up to the trip, I didn't really think about it much. I was busy wrapping up work projects and packing. I told a couple of friends where I was going, more as a formality than anything else. Cabin in West Virginia, I said. Total digital detox. They were like, cool, have fun. Don't get eaten by bears. Yeah, little did I know. The drive was long, like really long. I'm used to city driving, stop and go traffic, you know the drill. This was different. This was hours and hours of winding roads, barely any other cars, and the scenery just kept getting more and more, well, remote. The GPS signal kept cutting out, which was annoying, and I started to feel a little uneasy. It was getting dark by the time I was supposed to be getting close. The directions Elias had sent were pretty vague. Just turn off the main highway at this point. Follow this road for so many miles, look for a dirt road on the left. Blah blah blah. No street names, no landmarks, just woods. Finally, after what felt like forever, I thought I was in the right area. I turned onto this dirt road, and road is being generous. It was more like a bumpy, rutted track through the trees. My little sedan was definitely not designed for this kind of terrain. Branches scraped against the sides, and I was pretty sure I bottomed out a few times. My phone had zero signal now, completely dead zone. Great. After another eternity of bumping along, I saw it, the cabin. It was even more rustic than the photos had suggested. Small, dark wood, looked kind of hunched over, if that makes sense, like it was trying to hide in the trees. There was a porch, a rickety-looking set of steps leading up to it, and a single bare bulb hanging above the door, casting a weak, yellowish light. Everything else was just dark. Trees all around, thick woods pressing in close. No other houses in sight. No sounds except the wind in the trees and the crunch of gravel under my tires as I parked. I turned off the engine and just sat there for a minute listening. Silence. Complete, utter silence. Except for the wind. It was intense. Peaceful in a way, but also a little unsettling. I took a deep breath and got out of the car. The air was cool and damp, smelled like pine needles and earth. I grabbed my bag from the trunk and trudged up the steps to the porch. The front door was a solid wooden thing, looked old and heavy. There was a rusty key box next to the door. I fumbled with it for a minute, managed to get it open, and there was a key inside. Okay, so far so good. I unlocked the door and pushed it open. It creaked loudly, like it hadn't been opened in a while. The inside was dim. The only light was coming from the porch bulb filtering through the window next to the door. It smelled musty, like old wood and dust. I flipped the light switch inside the door, and a single overhead bulb flickered to life, casting a weak yellowish glow over the main room. It was small, one room, basically. A living area with a worn-out couch and a coffee table. A small kitchen area in one corner with a stove and a mini fridge, and a door leading off to what I assumed was the bedroom and bathroom. Everything was old, really old. The furniture was mismatched and worn. The walls were paneled with dark wood, and the floorboards creaked under my feet. It wasn't dirty exactly, but it definitely wasn't clean. It felt lived in, but not in a cozy, welcoming way. More like inhabited. I walked over to the window and peered out. Just trees, trees, and more trees, stretching as far as I could see in the dim light, darkness pressing in all around. I shivered even though it wasn't that cold inside. I had this sudden, overwhelming feeling of being completely alone, isolated, cut off. I told myself to stop being ridiculous. This is what I wanted, right? Seclusion, peace and quiet. I was just tired and stressed from the drive. I needed to unpack, get settled, maybe make some tea. I went back to the car and grabbed the rest of my bags. Inside, I explored a bit more. The bedroom was tiny, just a bed and a small dresser. The bathroom was even smaller, with a shower stall, a toilet, and a sink. Everything was functional, but definitely basic. There were towels and sheets provided, thankfully, though they smelled faintly of mothballs. Charming. I unpacked, made the bed, and then went to the kitchen area to see about tea. The mini fridge was humming loudly in the silence, and it was mostly empty. Just a few condiments and a half-empty bottle of something unidentifiable. The cabinets were sparsely stocked with chipped dishes and some rusty pots and pans. There was a kettle, though, and a box of tea bags that looked like they'd been there since the 70s. Still, tea was tea. I filled the kettle with water from the tap, which thankfully seemed to be working, and put it on the stove. While the water was heating, I wandered back into the living area and looked around. Again, there wasn't much to look at, really. A couple of dusty bookshelves with a random assortment of old paperbacks, mostly westerns and thrillers. A small, ancient-looking TV in the corner with no remote, and that was about it. Except for the fireplace. That was actually kind of nice. A big stone fireplace taking up almost one whole wall. There was a stack of firewood next to it and some kindling. I thought about starting a fire, but it was still early evening, and I wasn't really cold yet, maybe later. The kettle whistled, startling me in the silence. I made my tea, took it back to the living area and sat down on the couch. It was surprisingly comfortable, despite looking like it had seen better decades. I sipped my tea and looked around, trying to get a feel for the place. It was definitely rustic and isolated, and kind of creepy, if I was being honest with myself. There was just something about the atmosphere that felt off. A heavy stillness, a sense of being watched even though I knew there was no one around for miles. It was probably just my imagination running wild, fueled by the long drive and the general weirdness of the whole situation. I told myself to relax, to enjoy the peace and quiet. This was supposed to be a relaxing getaway, remember? As the evening wore on, the darkness outside deepened. The single porch light did little to penetrate the thick woods surrounding the cabin. Inside, the silence became more pronounced, broken only by the occasional creak of the floorboards and the hum of the fridge. I tried reading one of the paperbacks I found on the bookshelf, but I couldn't really focus. My mind kept wandering. My senses felt heightened. Every little sound seemed amplified in the silence. Every shadow seemed to move in the dim light. I started to feel uneasy. Not scared exactly, but definitely uneasy, like something was wrong. But I couldn't put my finger on what it was. There was no logical reason to feel this way. I was safe in the cabin, alone in the woods, exactly as I'd planned. So why did I feel this prickling sense of dread crawling up my spine? I got up and started pacing around the small room. Maybe I just needed to stretch my legs. I went to the door and opened it, stepping out onto the porch. The darkness outside was intense, like pitch black. The porch light barely made a dent in it. I could hear the wind rustling the leaves in the trees, and something else, a faint, rustling sound in the undergrowth, just at the edge of the light, like something moving around out there. I strained my ears, trying to identify the sound. Was it an animal? A deer? Maybe? Or something else? Something bigger? My heart started to beat a little faster. I told myself it was just my imagination again, that I was being paranoid. It was the woods, after all. Of course there were animals. But the sound, it didn't sound like an animal. It was heavier, more deliberate, like something was pacing just beyond the edge of the light, watching. I stood there for a moment longer, frozen, listening. The rustling sound continued, circling just outside the pool of light. I couldn't see anything, just blackness in the rustling leaves. My skin started to crawl. I felt a cold sweat break out on my forehead. Okay. Nope. I wasn't doing this. I backed slowly back inside the cabin, closed the door, and locked it. Then I double-tapped the lock, just to be sure. And then I went and locked the back door too, even though I hadn't even seen a back door yet, just to be safe. Inside, I felt a little better, a little more protected. But the feeling of unease still lingered, a knot in my stomach that wouldn't go away. I turned on the ancient TV, hoping for some noise, some distraction, static. Just static. No signal out here, apparently. Fantastic. I tried to tell myself it was all in my head, that I was just tired and stressed and letting my imagination get the better of me. But the feeling, it was so persistent, so real, like a warning, like something was definitely wrong. I decided to start a fire. Maybe some warmth and light would make me feel better. I gathered some kindling and logs, arranged them in the fireplace, and lit a match. It took a few tries, but eventually the kindling caught, and a small flame flickered to life. I added more kindling, then a log, and slowly the fire grew, casting a warm, flickering light around the room. The fire did help, a little. The cabin felt a bit cozier, a bit less menacing. I sat on the couch, wrapped in a blanket, watching the flames dance and crackle. The rustling sounds outside seemed to fade into the background, or maybe I was just tuning them out, focusing on the fire. I stayed up late just staring into the flames, trying to calm my racing thoughts. Eventually exhaustion won out, and I drifted off to sleep on the couch, still wrapped in the blanket, the fire crackling softly in the fireplace. I woke up abruptly in the middle of the night. Something had woken me, but I wasn't sure what. For a moment, I just lay there disoriented, listening. Silence. The fire had died down to embers, casting flickering shadows around the room. It was colder now, the cabin feeling damp and chilly. Then I heard it again. A sound, faint but distinct. A scratching sound, like fingernails scraping against wood. It seemed to be coming from the walls. My heart started to pound in my chest. I sat up, listening intently. Scratch, scratch, scratch. It was definitely coming from inside the walls. Like something was trapped in there, or trying to get in. I held my breath, listening, every nerve on high alert. The scratching continued, moving slowly along the wall, closer to the window. Scratch, scratch, then silence again. I waited, frozen, for what felt like an eternity. Nothing, just silence, and the faint crackling of the embers in the fireplace. Maybe I'd imagined it. Maybe it was just the house settling, old wood creaking and shifting in the night. Yeah, that had to be it. Just the house settling. I tried to convince myself, but the feeling of unease was back, stronger than ever. The scratching sound, it had sounded so deliberate, so purposeful, not like random creaking, like something was listening, watching, waiting. I got up, my legs shaky, and went to the fireplace. I poked at the embers, trying to coax them back to life, but they were too far gone. The cabin was getting colder, the shadows deeper. I felt utterly exposed, vulnerable in the darkness. I decided to turn on the lights, all of them, every light in the cabin. Maybe that would help. Maybe light would push back the darkness, banish the feeling of dread. I flipped every switch I could find. The overhead bulb in the living room flickered weakly. The porch light cast its feeble glow, and that was it. No other lights. Great. The cabin was still dim, still shadowy, but at least it wasn't completely dark anymore. I went to the window and peered out into the woods. Nothing, just trees. Black against the slightly less black sky. No movement, no sounds except the wind. I stood there for a long time, staring out into the darkness, trying to see something, anything. But there was nothing to see, just the woods, silent and still. And yet, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched, that something was out there in the darkness, observing me. I went back to the couch and sat down, pulling the blanket tighter around me. I couldn't sleep. My mind was racing, filled with anxious thoughts, fueled by the silence and the darkness and the scratching sound in the walls. What was that sound? What was out there in the woods? And why did I feel this overwhelming sense of dread? As the night wore on, the scratching sound returned, sporadically, always from the walls. Sometimes it was faint, barely audible. Other times it was louder, more insistent, like something was trying to claw its way through the wood. Each time I heard it, my heart would jump, and a fresh wave of fear would wash over me. I stayed awake for the rest of the night, huddled on the couch, listening to the scratching in the walls, staring into the darkness, waiting for dawn. The first hint of light filtering through the window was like a lifeline. Slowly, gradually, the darkness began to recede, the shadows to shrink, the scratching sounds stopped. The silence outside seemed less menacing, more normal. When the sun finally rose, casting a weak, watery light through the trees, I felt a wave of relief wash over me. Daylight, safety, the fear that had gripped me all night seemed to dissipate with the darkness. I told myself it had all been in my head, just a bad night, fueled by stress and isolation. Daylight always makes things seem less scary, right? I got up, stiff and sore from sleeping on the couch, and went to the kitchen to make coffee. Coffee, that's what I needed. Something normal, something routine to ground me back in reality. I found a jar of instant coffee in the cabinet, made myself a cup, and sat on the porch, watching the woods come to life in the morning light. The woods looked different in the daylight. Less menacing, more just woods. Sunlight dappled through the trees, birds were chirping, squirrels were scampering around. It was actually kind of pretty, peaceful. The feeling of dread from the night before seemed almost silly in the bright morning light. I told myself I was being ridiculous. It was just a cabin in the woods. A bit old, a bit rustic, a bit isolated, sure, but nothing to be scared of. I'd let my imagination run wild, that's all. I needed to relax, to enjoy the nature, to get some fresh air. That's why I came here, remember? I decided to go for a walk, get out of the cabin, explore the woods a bit, clear my head. I put on my hiking boots, grabbed a bottle of water, and stepped off the porch into the woods. The woods in the daylight were different. Not just pretty, but dense, thick, overgrown. The trees were tall and close together, blocking out much of the sunlight. Even in the daytime, it was still shady and dim under the canopy. The air was still cool and damp, smelled of earth and decaying leaves. I followed a faint trail leading away from the cabin, deeper into the woods. The trail was narrow and overgrown, barely visible in places. It twisted through the trees, up and down small hills, deeper and deeper into the forest. The sounds of birds and squirrels faded behind me, replaced by silence. A different kind of silence than in the cabin, a heavy, watchful silence. As I walked, I started to notice things I hadn't seen in the dark, strange shapes in the shadows, twisted branches that looked like figures, oddly placed rocks forming in natural patterns, and smells. Not just the smell of pine and earth, but other smells too. Faint, musky smells, unpleasant smells. I started to feel uneasy again. The daylight wasn't helping as much as I thought it would. The woods felt wrong, oppressive, like they were alive and watching me. I kept walking, telling myself I was just being paranoid, that it was just the woods, just nature, but the feeling wouldn't go away. It grew stronger with every step, a cold knot of dread tightening in my stomach. Then I saw it. Off the trail, deeper in the woods, something pale, something white, partially hidden behind a thicket of bushes. Curiosity, and maybe a little bit of morbid fascination, drew me towards it. I pushed through the bushes, branches scratching at my arms and face, and stepped into a small clearing. And there it was, a structure made of bone, white bone, bleached by the sun and rain. A crude, makeshift structure, like a small shrine or something else. It was hard to tell what kind of bones they were. Some looked like animal bones, but others were too human-like. Skulls, ribs, vertebrae, all arranged in a disturbing, unnatural way. My breath caught in my throat. My blood ran cold. This wasn't just nature, this wasn't just woods. This was something else, something dark, something wrong. I stared at the bone structure, frozen, my mind reeling. What was this? Who built it? And why? 1,000 questions raced through my head. none of them with any easy answers. And then a new sound, faint but distinct, carried on the breeze, a humming sound, a low, rhythmic humming like chanting. It seemed to be coming from deeper in the woods, further down the trail, the direction I'd been heading. My heart started to pound in my chest. The humming grew louder, closer. It was definitely chanting. Low, guttural voices, speaking in a language I didn't recognize, a language that sounded ancient and malevolent. Fear, raw and primal, gripped me. This wasn't just unease anymore. This was terror. Real, bone-chilling terror. I knew in that moment that I was in danger. That something was terribly, terribly wrong, and that I needed to get out of there. Now, I turned and ran. Not walked, not hiked, but ran. I scrambled back through the bushes, back onto the trail, and sprinted back the way I came. My lungs burning, my legs aching, my heart pounding like a drum in my ears. The chanting grew louder behind me, closer, following me through the trees. I didn't look back. I didn't dare to look back. I just ran, blindly, desperately, back towards the cabin, back towards safety. I didn't even know if the cabin was safe anymore, but it was the only place I knew, the only direction I had. I burst out of the woods and into the clearing around the cabin, gasping for breath, my body trembling. The cabin looked different now, not rustic and cozy, but small and vulnerable. Huddled in the shadows of the trees, the porch light seemed even weaker, barely pushing back the encroaching darkness. I stumbled up the steps, fumbled with the key, unlocked the door, and slammed it shut behind me, locking it, double locking it, bolting it, every lock I could find. Then I leaned against the door, panting, my body shaking, listening. Silence. The chanting had stopped, or maybe it was just too faint to hear inside the cabin. I didn't know what to do. I was trapped, miles from anywhere. No phone signal, no way to call for help. And something was out there, in the woods. Something, chanting. Something that built bone shrines. Something, evil. I looked around the cabin, desperately searching for something, anything. A weapon, a phone, a map, anything that could help me. Nothing. Just the same old furniture. The dusty bookshelves, the ancient TV, hopeless. Then my eyes fell on the fireplace. The fireplace. The fire I built last night. The embers were long gone, but the firewood, the stack of firewood next to the fireplace. Logs, heavy logs. Maybe I could use them as weapons, as something to defend myself with. It was a long shot, I knew, but it was all I had. I grabbed a log, the biggest one I could lift, hefted it in my hands. It was heavy, solid. It would do, maybe. I stood there, in the middle of the cabin, clutching the log, listening, waiting. The silence outside was heavy, oppressive, but it wasn't empty. I could feel it. Something was out there, still watching, still waiting. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that it wouldn't be silent for long, that whatever was out there, in the woods, was coming for me, and there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Just me, alone in the cabin, with a log in my hands, waiting for the darkness to come for me. And that, honestly, is the scariest feeling I think I've ever had. Just that sense of absolute, inescapable dread. You know, like you're just waiting for something terrible to happen and you know it's coming and there's nothing you can do to stop it. That's the kind of fear that really gets under your skin, the kind that sticks with you long after you're safe. And even now, years later, thinking back on it, I still get that same cold feeling, that same prickle of fear. It's like a shadow that just won't go away.
Sweet dreams.